Hey, welcome back. You know, I was thinking the other day about the worlds we build when we're young. For me, it was elaborate cities made of Lego, with stories I'd whisper to myself about the people living in them. It felt so private, so inconsequential. But what if that childhood world wasn't just a game? What if it was a secret training ground that forged not one, but three of the most revolutionary writers in the English language? I'm Ibnul J. Farabi, and this is The Great Conversation. Today, we're stepping into a parsonage on the wild, windswept moors of 19th century Yorkshire. Inside, for motherless children, Charlotte, Branwell, Emily, and Anne Brontë are huddled together. The world outside is gray, isolated, and rigid, but in their hands, they hold a set of 12 wooden soldiers. And with these tiny figures, they are about to build an empire of the imagination so vast, so detailed, that it would become the crucible for Jane Eyre, for Wuthering Heights, for the Tenant of Wildfell Hall. They called it Glass Town, and its story is one of the most fascinating examples of how genius is often a collaborative and deeply playful act. It began, as the best things do, with a gift. In 1826, their father gave Branwell those 12 toy soldiers. Each child chose one, named it, and gave it a character. But they didn't just play with them, they wrote for them. They created minute, handwritten magazines, smaller than a modern smartphone, filled with stories, poems, histories, political debates, and newspaper articles for their fictional world. They mapped continents, drew up governments, chronicled wars, and built glittering capital cities like Verdopolis. This wasn't just child's play. It was a decades-long, obsessive act of collaborative world-building. Think of it as a 19th century, analog, literary version of building a shared universe, decades before Tolkien mapped Middle-earth. Charlotte and Branwell were the primary architects, but Emily and Anne soon broke away to create their own realm within this universe, a wild, naturalistic land called Gondal. This was their sandbox, their private laboratory for narrative. And in this laboratory, they weren't just writing stories. They were forging their literary voices. Consider the constraints they lived under as Victorian women. Publishing, especially under their own names, was a near impossible frontier. But in the pages of their tiny booklets, there were no constraints. Charlotte could write as the cynical, Byronic Duke of Zamorna, exploring themes of passion, power, and moral ambiguity with a freedom she'd never be allowed in public. Emily could pour the raw, untamed spirit of her Gondal sagas, full of captivity, rebellion, and a fierce connection to landscape, directly into the psyche of a character like Heathcliff, and could practice the clear-eyed, moral scrutiny of her character's flaws, a skill that would later define her radical critique of alcoholism and marital abuse in The Tenant of Wildfell Hall. Glasstown and Gondal were their practice rooms. Here, they could be poets, soldiers, villains, and journalists. They tried on personas, they failed spectacularly, they wrote terrible melodrama, and they wrote breathtakingly beautiful verse. All without an audience, without a critic, without a single thought of publication. It was art for the sake of the game, and that pure creative space is where their authentic voices were honed to a razor's edge. What strikes me most, as an engineer and storyteller, is the sheer systematic creativity of it. They built a functioning, interconnected literary system. They wrote newspapers reporting on events in their stories. They wrote histories that referenced other histories they'd written. They created characters who were authors writing about other characters. It was a metafictional universe, a web of stories supporting other stories. This wasn't random daydreaming. It was a disciplined, almost professional output. Charlotte, in her early teens, was producing thousands of words a week for this paracosm. That's a creative stamina that directly translates to the endurance needed to write a novel. They were, in essence, running a private, family-owned literary studio for over a decade. Light Knot Studios has nothing on the Brontë siblings. There's a profound personal lesson for me in all of this, sitting here in New York, a world away from the Yorkshire moors. We often treat our childhood passions as phases to be outgrown. We separate our serious work from our play. We think of genius as a solitary, austere, and terribly adult phenomenon. The Brontes shatter that myth. Their greatest work didn't spring from nowhere. It was the direct, mature evolution of a shared game. That collaborative spirit, that unself-conscious joy in creation, was the foundation. They didn't set out to be literary giants. They set out to amuse each other, to build a refuge from an often harsh world. And in doing so, they accidentally built the skills, the worlds, and the boldness they would need to change literature forever. So, the next time you find yourself dismissing a silly idea, a playful project, a world you build just for the fun of it, remember the 4 children in that quiet parsonage. Remember that the epic landscapes of Wuthering Heights were first sketched in the imaginary valleys of Gondal. That Jane Eyre's fierce, independent voice was first practiced in the pages of a handwritten magazine for a toy soldier. Their story reminds us that the most serious art can have the most playful beginnings. That the worlds we build in private can, one day, illuminate the world for everyone else. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Great Conversation. If this journey into the secret workshop of the Brontes resonated with you, please share it with someone who loves stories about the origins of stories. For more deep dives into history and literature, you can find us and support the show at Light Knot Studios. That's lightknotstudios.com. I'm Ibnul J. Farabi. Until next time, keep building your own glass towns. You never know what giants they might forge.